How important do you think green spaces are to a city or Hyde Park? I think green spaces are really important to any city because they give residents a space to freely enjoy leisure time and be outside without being constrained to any business or establishment. Yara. Green spaces actually play a bigger role in residents than people actually realize. There's a lot of scientific literature out there about the beneficial effects of green spaces on public health, not just in terms of environment improvement, but also as an alternative to increasingly expensive methods of leisure or food acquisition. Especially when we talk about racially diverse communities like Hyde Park that include historically marginalized groups. Having open and free access to vegetation or parks is a great way to reconnect individuals to nature and provides one of the only remaining free methods of escapism and relaxation in a stressful world. Additionally, I think the communal nature and maintenance of these spaces is integral in the development of tightly knit communities. Aside from shared experiences, shared spaces may be one of the greatest forces in the unison of individuals in communities. Robert. I think green spaces might be a little more important for urban environments than in other spaces, like suburbs, if only because of the density of a city. People, machines, and buildings are so crammed together, and green spaces provide a healing refuge from pollution, literal and figurative. For example, Hyde Park's surprising abundance of green space, I can think of 3 parks in close proximity to each other, helps to characterize it as a walkable neighborhood. Miranda. What is your relationship to green space, public or private, in Hyde Park? Being a college student in Hyde Park, I rely on green spaces as a form of work-life separation. Most of my time around campus is typically tied to school-related activities, so green spaces allow me to have a space outside of a classroom setting. Yara. I've come to realize that I'm actually a lot more dependent on green spaces than I've ever consciously noticed. When I walk in Hyde Park, I always take the path with the most greenery visible, the more scenic route, which isn't something I've ever really done consciously. I often cut through parks as a shortcut to my destination. I also appreciate green spaces during my free time, and I fondly recall lingering in Hyde Park's parks at sunset on my way back home. During the pandemic, green spaces have provided a means to safely enjoy time with my friends. Miranda. What about Hyde Park's green spaces is special or different than in other cities or places? I think Hyde Park's green spaces are really special because they're woven into spaces you might not typically associate with greenery. There are tons of small gardens and parks found in areas such as businesses, museums, schools, and restaurants. Yara. I think one of its main differences is the availability of private and public green spaces, and how students often engage with both public areas in the area and private spaces at universities and museums. But the opposite is not personally seen as often, despite the university's effect and presence in the community. Robert. Would you say residents have equal access to Hyde Park's green spaces? I think for the most part, most residents have equal access to Hyde Park's green spaces, since most of them are public parks and gardens. However, the UChicago campus being a large component of Hyde Park, and being considered a botanical garden, probably gives people affiliated with the university greater access to this space. Yara. Something I've noticed is that the amount of green space on or near school grounds seems connected to socioeconomic status. The UChicago Lab School has large and beautiful fields, playgrounds, and gardens, but every other public school in the community has little to no green spaces available. Also, getting to certain parks like the Promontory Point and Jackson Park isn't easy. You have to avoid cars speeding down Lakeshore Drive. I've also noticed that private green spaces are something only afforded to the affluent. The richer you are, the more private green space you have. I also think much of Hyde Park's nicer green space is concentrated around commercial spaces, like 53rd and 57th. So the quality of green space does seem to vary, and inevitably that means the people who live in areas further from nicer green spaces do not experience the same level of access to the same quality of green space. Miranda. How has your relationship to or view of green spaces changed since COVID? Green spaces have definitely become much more important to me since COVID. With very limited activities to do, green spaces around Hyde Park have given me the ability to leave my apartment and get a change of scenery while still feeling safe. Yara. I had never really wondered about the extent to which green spaces aided my own personal mental health, but I would have actually gone insane if it weren't for parks and open green spaces during the pandemic. Though it's a bit harder and less encouraged to interact more with the outside world in the pandemic, I think the importance of green spaces as open, free representations of communities has increased. In a pandemic-ridden world where the norm is to increasingly rely on commodified and screen-confined activities as methods of escapism from COVID, green spaces are a literal breath of fresh air that provide a brief escape into memories of a free and fresh pre-pandemic world. Robert.